We're on.
Good. Slightly belated start, but we made it in the end. Technology notwithstanding. Welcome to this evening's meeting of the Planning Committee. First item on the agenda is apologies for absence. I believe there are apologies from Councillor Fuller.
Yep.
Can you accept those apologies? Yeah. Right, well, that moves us very rapidly on to Brian Wood, who is the Nnc, I can get around that, Senior Tree and Landscape Officer. He's going to give us a presentation on tree protection and planning, trees on development sites, and hopefully we'll be able to entertain one or two questions if we have any. So, Brian, thank you.
Yeah, I'll try and be as brief as I can be, but tend to go on a bit, and the subject is, it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. But I never know really what to say. I have to pitch things because I don't know what information you have. Obviously, at the moment, we interact with you as a planning authority. We consult widely. At the moment, we consult on just about everything, all our notifications and conservation areas, all our tree preservation order applications, and obviously all our planning applications. And we receive comments back from you. And the sort of typical comments we get, not to see a lot of objections from town and parish councils, but I'd say more than half of the comments we receive back are no objections, subject to the tree officer's use, something along those lines. So hopefully by coming out and chatting to you, I can sort of hopefully give you a bit more power to make those decisions yourself, rather than trying to rely on me. And I thought the best way to do that is just to explain the legislation. If you know all about it and you understand how it works, please let me know and stop me, because I can go on and on. So I was going to try and run through tree preservation orders, trees and conservation areas, two different types of applications that we get. One's application, one's a notification. Just to let you know what we can and can't do, and what it's worth you commenting on, and sometimes what it's maybe not worth you commenting on. And then hopefully we'll have time just quickly run through the trees and development. There's obviously a few applications on at the moment that are of interest to that. I'm happy to chat about them as best I can. Probably the Cotston Road and Nnc Call ones, probably the most, for trees. And then I know we've got the new one in by the cemetery as well, the applications. Just hit the ground that I've been involved in some of the pre-app work on that as well. So anyway, I'll try and carry on. So just a little bit about me, letting you know who the hell I am, because I've only been here for a couple of years. I've been tree officering now for nearly 30 years, which is a little bit frightening. So I've been with what was East Northants, now North Northants, and before that I worked for Kettering and Corby for a short while. I was employed by Kettering to try and sort out Corby's trees for about 2 years before Unitary started, and Corby Council very generously put an awful lot of money forwards to try and bring their tree stock up before all the councils joined together, and I think we did a good job. Part of a shared service with Kettering, we managed all the landscape in Corby for 2 years, and if you ever been to Corby, not that many people do, you would see, I think it's transformed quite a lot really. Before that, I dipped out of local authority for a while and worked for a big engineering company, Amy, as a consultant working nationally. Worked sort of Highways England and a bit of rail, did a little bit of HS2 that I didn't really enjoy. Worked all over the country and decided I didn't really like working in the private industry. I really like working for local authorities as a tree officer, so I came back. Actually feel like I can make a difference. I'm one of these people who still believes in sort of public services. It shouldn't be a dirty word. So you see, I've been armed officers in various places. I was at Huntingdonshire for 13 years, which isn't too far away. And Huntingdonshire is not that dissimilar a makeup to what was East Northants, mostly rural, a few towns, and lots of beautiful villages. An amazing landscape. Before that, I was at Peterborough City Council for 4 years, where I managed the whole thing there. And before that, in London for 2 years, and started off my career as a tree officer down in Dorset. From Leicestershire originally, so I'm doing this job, you kind of have to go where the work is. And before that, I started as a tree surgeon. That's really how I got into it. I was a private contractor and I got a job at Warwick Castle. So So there's two ways we can protect trees that really apply here, and this is just for local planning authorities, so it's planning law, Town Planning Act. So I'll just put an image of your conservation area up. So all the trees within that area are protected, just the fact that they're in the conservation area. And it's not belt and braces protection, but it's pretty good protection. The fines are still the same. If you damage a tree, it's a criminal offence, it's serious, it's more than just a planning offence. And I don't know if you can see this where it hasn't come out, but there are some, see these green symbols around the edges? These are our tree preservation orders, and you tend to find they're the ones outside the conservation area, because the trees and conservation are protected. So, you know, it's kind of like belt and braces protection. So actually individually identifying every tree, making an assessment of them, and showing why they're valuable in the landscape. So, you probably all know a lot about conservation areas, but it's just really a special area for, you know, historical, cultural, you know, archaeological interest in places that make it nice. And we designate local authorities, we designate conservation areas, makes changes to them. So a special provision in the Act for covering conservation areas, so trees that aren't protected by TPOs. So it's called, it's a real catchy name, Section 211. We call them Section 211 notices. You call them applications, but they're not. Just means, so if you've got a tree in your garden, you're in the conservation area, you just write to the local authority and say what work you want to do, and that's your notice, and you have to give 6 weeks notice in writing. If we don't reply after 6 weeks, you can do work. And they're the majority of the applications or notices that we consult you on. And there seems to be a lot of misunderstanding about this, but it's very limited. So where you get those, so they're what we, on the end of our application reference, we give it the suffix TCA, so trees and conservation areas. But they are notices, they're not applications. So when we determine them, we're not determining them. All we're saying is we're not going to make a tree preservation order, so you can go and do the work. If I'm not happy with the work that they're proposing, if I think it's going to be harmful to the tree or to the value of the area, I'll negotiate with them within the 6 weeks. And if we still can't get anywhere, if I'm really unhappy with what we're proposing to do, I think it's unjustified, and it'd be harmful to the area, we'll make a tree preservation order. But that's you know, really all we can do is let it go, so we haven't got an objection, let the 6 weeks lapse, or we make a tree preservation order, but I prefer to try and negotiate within that period. And most people are comfortable if you sit down and chat to them. But that's how that works. So I just wanted you to know, so that when you're making your comments, you're aware of that. So I can't issue any conditions like we can on a planning application or a TPO application. We can't refuse it. All we can do is make a tree preservation order or let it lapse. Okay, so so the purpose of it is just to give us an opportunity, you know, whether or not we should protect the tree with a tree preservation order. So obviously the tree preservation orders are slightly different. You know, the legal order that we actually make, and they prohibit all these things without an application being made. And if someone does make an application, you know, we can condition that. We can limit the amount of work. So if you apply to us to reduce the side length of a branch by 2 meters, I could refuse that. I could condition it that you can reduce the branch by 1 meter. So it's very, very prescriptive about that. If you remove a tree, if you want to remove a tree, I can condition a replacement, and you know, you'd have to do that. So that's the main difference. And also, the Secretary of State review routes also prohibits activity. The whole tree is protected by a tree preservation order. The application process is slightly similar to the conservation area, but we need more information. With conservation area notification, in theory, you can just write a handwritten notice and send it in. There's no requirement to use the standard forms. And we'd like people to do that because it works better, and thankfully most people do. To talk about all the exemptions. So there's various exemptions that apply to both trees in conservation areas and trees protected by TPOs. So dead trees, yeah, they're exempt. They don't need to let us know. In theory, And same with dead branches within the tree. If you've got a tree that's got lots of dead wood, you can remove the dead wood without applying to us. And this obviously can cause a lot of problems, because if you get tree surgeons out with chainsaws running in a sensitive area, locals don't like that, and they're concerned that something might be happening that might be harmful. So our phone rings off, our email goes off, our duty planner goes off, and then it's very difficult. So and there's various other things that you see. To prevent or abate a nuisance is a difficult one, because obviously a nuisance in law isn't necessarily what most people consider a nuisance to be. If you've got planning consent that overrides a tree preservation order, so planning application comes in, the tree's removed as part of the planning application, and it's shown on the plans as removed, and the plans are approved, that would override the tree preservation order. Statutory undertakers, again, it depends on how you class a statutory undertaker. So, electricity company or gas company coming in, or water company coming in to install a new main or something, I wouldn't class that as an exemption for a statutory undertaker. It's only if there's like emergency works. I haven't put down aerodrome, so if it doesn't apply around here, but that can be a real problem. They're most of the ones that apply to you. Do you want me to go through the application process? You can try, just wary of time, that's all, yeah? Okay, so for tree preservation orders, the things that we need are, it has to be made in writing on the application form. There has to be a very descriptive and accurate specification of the work. We can't have something like prune the tree, or move the tree by 30%, or cut back by 30%. It has to be exact. And this is one of the problems that we have during our validations. And the work, really has to be something that makes sense in, tree work specification terms. And so we always advise people, you can try and get a tree contractor to help you fill in applications. We get some horrendous applications, and the problem is now the way the local authority works, the way we work as a planning authority. We're a paperless office for starters, which doesn't help a lot of people. Not everyone's computer savvy and comfortable using the technology. We have hundreds and hundreds of notifications and applications sent in from the villages, from people who live in villages. And over the years, they've kind of got used to a certain level of service from my role, from us. And we're just not able to provide that sort of service anymore, because we don't have the systems and the back office and the support to allow us to do that. So what happens is somebody will send in an application, we have a validation team of people sit in our office, and they've got a tick list, and they send a letter back saying, no, this isn't acceptable. And this may be someone who's applied 2 or 3 times in the past with the same level of detail, and it's been acceptable. So I try and chat to our validation team monthly, and we go through any tricky applications that they're struggling with, and we try and be pragmatic. The biggest issue is reasons. You have to state a reason why you want to do the works of the tree when you make an application. And that's for me, because my decision is based upon the justification for the work against the loss of landscape value. That's the only judgment that we make really when assessing a TP application. And I can't do that if you don't tell me why you want to do the work. And you may see, if you look at our applications, you may actually see that as yourself. So obviously we need to identify the trees accurately, and there should be a little sketch plan. Specify clearly. That's also a problem. A lot of the tree contractors, they just don't want to specify their work very well. And it needs to be accurate. So when I grant consent, don't have to write a huge, long-worded technical condition limiting exactly what they do to the tree, and then say, I'm going to come out the site and make sure you only do this amount of work to the tree. I've gone through all that, haven't I? Yeah. So tree preservation order applications, we've got 8 weeks to determine those. So for conservation area notifications, it's 6 weeks. Obviously, there's no fees. We usually consult with our parish and town councils. The other three legacy authorities in the new North Northants, Kettering, Corby and Wellingborough, don't. They do not consult with any town or parish councils for any of their tree preservation order applications or conservation area notifications. So this is just to let you know that as we align all our services, somebody may say, why are you consulting everybody on every one of these applications? They're all on your website. The parish and town councils can look at it themselves. So just to let you know, this may not happen. It's probably something out of my area of work. Obviously, we're trying to align all the services across the authorities, but it's a huge piece of work because we all operate so differently. Not only the way we operate, but our areas are so different. You know, this district, East Northants, is nothing like any of the other authorities. 60 odd conservation areas and villages, and it's huge historic landscapes. You know, none of the other areas have got this sort of same makeup. So, just in application numbers from my job, compared to Wellingborough, we have, I think it's 4 times more tree preservation order applications and 3 times more Section 2.1 notifications compared to Wellingborough Borough. Again, because of we have so many conservation areas and so many more trees that require protection. So just to try and operate the same system across all the authorities the old areas is going to be difficult. I don't know if you can see this. This is very simple flow chart showing, how we should be dealing with tree works applications. So we sort of validate them. Sometimes do a pre-application visit. We tend not to do that these days. I'd like to get back to the stage where I can do that. So it just sort of goes through it. I don't think you really need to see that. But ultimately, if we agree, we can apply conditions. And for obviously Section 2.1 notifications, there's no need to appeal. But for tree preservation order applications, the appeal process is pretty similar to planning applications. You appeal to the Secretary of State. There's a fast track system now, although since coronavirus, the fast track system is taking more than a year to get dealt with, so it's not so quick. You can, similar to planning applications, you request a hearing if you want. I've never known a tree application go to public inquiry. But you can have a hearing, but generally speaking, the fast track application is they take your report that you wrote as an officer during the application, and you just send them that and a copy of the tree preservation order to prove that the tree is protected. And they'll send an independent consultant, using our arboricultural consultant, out, and they'll write a report and weigh the balance of both sides' arguments. You can turn up on the site visit if you want, but it's generally just to inform them with facts, not to put forward your case. Obviously, a hearing is just like a normal planning hearing. You tend to get a planning inspector with a landscape background, and they, in my experience, they tend to be able to make a sort of wider judgment than the fast track, where they always employ an arboricultural consultant. So that's just a tip. If you get a refusal yourself for a TP application and you want someone to maybe have a broader view look at it, apply for an appeal, a hearing, sorry. The Section 2.1 notices for trees and conservation areas is similar sort of thing, TP applications. We do provide a standardised form. It's on the planning portal. We don't force people to use it if they don't want to, but we try and encourage them to use it. And all they have to do is put something in writing, just enough details to identify the tree. They don't have to do a sketch plan, and they just have to kind of set out what works they want to do. We really can't refuse applications. Our validation team, we're refusing them because people didn't submit plans, but we're not allowed to do that. So it's just as well that nobody complained or to the Ombudsman. The process is very similar. Again, we only have 6 weeks to determine these. We tend to do a desktop-based, just to scan through all the documents straight away to see if it's just a small hazel tree in somebody's back garden you can't see from anywhere. There's no point in me going and visiting. It's a waste of my time. I've got more important things to do. So many trees to protect, and all our tree preservation orders need to be reviewed anyway. So that's the way we do it. Kind of triage is the word at the moment. Is we kind of triage applications as best we can, and then we can concentrate on the ones that we really need to concentrate on. Again, I've put in there about consultations. The guidance from the government has always been that it's up to us if we consult and the level of consultation that we do. So at the moment, within East Northants, we more or less consult on all of our Section 201 notices with the town and parish councils. In previous authorities I've worked for, I've consulted when I felt it was in our interest to consult. So if I feel that there's an application that I'm uncomfortable with, that's when I would have gone to the town or parish council and consulted with them, usually gone to a meeting if I've got the time to chat about it with them, say I'm uncomfortable with this, let you know the reasons why. If you want to make your objections based on that, you can. And it kind of, if you do go to appeal, then I feel it gives you a slightly stronger hand. But I'm still relatively new here. I understand that's just the way we do things. We consult widely, and everyone's used to doing that. There's a flow chart there, just showing you how Section 201 notices are, and ultimately it's down to would you make a tree preservation order or not? And if we're not going to make a tree preservation order, if the tree doesn't come up to the standards, which is, I'll go through that in a little while, but it's mostly, can you see the tree from a public place? And if it were removed, or if it were proven very badly harmed in the long term, what impact's that going to have on the amenity value, the landscape value, the character of the conservation area, all those sort of things. And then there's the test of expediency. So to make a tree preservation order, you've really got to show that there's a threat or a perceived threat to the tree. So obviously, receiving a notification that someone's going to fell a tree, that's standard. I think I've probably just gone through this. So assessing trees for TPOs, it's expedient is the word that the government say it's got to be expedient in the interests of amenity. The government doesn't tell us what amenity means, they don't define it, and they don't really explain what expediency. So they're just bits that we tease out ourselves, and we come up with our own methods for determining whether or not we should protect a tree. But it's really, is it the right tree in the right place? If it were removed, would it be a loss? The other way. And for instance, that London plane tree that we looked at earlier, you can see that from Clapton Road. Everybody who passes Clapton Road sees that tree, whether they notice it or not. It's there subconsciously in the distance, and it's been there for 60, 70 years. So it's got that value in the landscape. It's been bringing to that area for 60 or 70 years. So how do you place a value on that? You know, it's almost, another way of trying to look at it is if you wanted to go and buy that, you couldn't. It's impossible. You could be a billionaire, you can't go and buy that tree and have it. You've got to wait that time for it to grow. So its value is huge. And my colleague Lloyd Mills get very irritated to say this, but you know, if a listed building's been damaged, in theory, you can rebuild the fabric of the building using traditional methods, traditional materials. With a tree, you can't. You know, if the tree's gone, it's gone. And once the tree's damaged, they don't repair themselves. They kind of have to work around it. So I think that's one of the reasons why the fines and the enforcement is so tough on trees. So obviously it's a criminal activity. If you're found guilty of contravening tree preservation order legislation, and the fine is potentially enormous, so up to £20,000 for damaging a tree, or even greater, depending on whether there's any profit to be made. So if it's a development site and you're felling trees, then the actual value that can be made out of the site, the court can impose fines going up. I think I worked in pools on my jobs, but I think last year was a case in Paul where I was done for, got done for about 78 grand for felling a tree. I think appeal brought it down to about 48, but it's still an enormous amount of money. And I'm sure we won't go and do it again. And also it puts a lot of other people off. So I just hope the council use that money for planting new trees and maintaining them. So again, I've sort of gone through amenity. I think I've kind of covered that. So it's really got to be visible from a public place. If it hasn't, and when I say public place, it doesn't have to be a public place right now, and it can be future. So if there's an area that's going to be developed and that will open up views, I'd class that. You can make an argument, a successful argument, that that's going to be amenity value in the future, because the trees, those trees are around for a long time. And also, some trees do have historical, cultural significance, or they could be an exceptional specimen of a species. Or I was chatting today with a little tree officer from Wellingborough about trophy trees. There used to be a tree register of Great Britain and Ireland, and they were magnificent specimens in girth or height of their species. So if a tree is scarce or has some sort of other significance. These are things that we look at obviously when we make an assessment. The tree, is it a sound tree? What condition is it in? Is it physiologically sound? Is it structurally sound? How long is it likely to be retained for? You'd like to think if you're making you shouldn't really be protecting a tree if it's only got another 10 years to survive. If we try and push everything to the limit, if someone took us to judicial review, we'd lose on something like that. We should only really be protecting a tree that's going to have a lot of landscape value for a long time. Public visibility, we make assessment of where you can see the tree from. Is it something you see in the skyline from a distance? Which Brigstock's a great example of that because it's in a valley, and you can see it from one side of the village right up to the other. And the trees on the other side, below the line of the village, look absolutely stunning. They just provide the perfect setting for the village. So that's their landscape value. In distance, some of them are right outside the house, street trees, some have glimpses between. So try and make an assessment, try and work out what makes that landscape value. I think I've talked about expediency and threats to the trees. When we make a tree preservation order, we can protect individual trees, groups of trees, and woodlands. We can also protect areas, although we're advised not to, because it's not accurate. So you'll quite often find if it's an emergency, we'll just get a map out, draw a big line around the map, write A1, and in the description of the order will say all trees of every species, all broadleaf trees of every species. And we'll make that instantly. But what we should be doing is going out and individually assessing whether the landscape value is as an individual tree or whether it's as a group of trees. For instance, an avenue may be better protected as a group because the landscape value is as an avenue of trees. This is a bit dry with this stuff, but it's more or less how we make a TPO. So obviously we make a TPO, we can have objections within 28 days. And we'd obviously notify you if we make a tree preservation order, and we have to notify all the neighbours. If we have 28 days and we have no objections, we can just confirm the TPO, and then it's made. That's it, it's done. If we do have objections, then we've got 6 months in which to confirm it, and we have to show that we take all the objections on board in a fair way. So we're undergoing some discussions at the moment with our legal advisor, who's giving council bad advice, I think, but that we need a proper scheme of delegation for dealing with these, and that it really should be put in front of one of our committees, and they should, with the objective, be allowed to come and do some public speaking, to make their case straightforward. A bit similar to when we're making planning policy, I think, everyone should have an opportunity to be able to comment on it and be sure that we deal with it fairly. There you go, that was it. Any questions? So that was about TPOs and trees in conservation areas. This looks like you've fallen asleep.
No, I've written loads of notes.
Do you have any particular trees that you favour? I mean, well, because
What context?
slow-growing trees like oaks and things, which last a long time, but also take a long time. And then people can't say, I'll give an example, we've got walnut trees in the churchyard, and they've had a fungus, and obviously people want to replace them, and they want to replace them, or did, with blossom trees or something. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Non-English, non-churchyard, inappropriate species. What would be your line on that?
It's just the right tree for the right place, is what I'd say. The location is saying you need to pick something that sits comfortably in the landscape, where there's enough space for it to grow above and below ground, and then that it shouldn't require drastic pruning to make it force fit into a place, certainly within the churchyard. And then you look at the history of the area, what works in the landscape, what sits comfortably in the landscape, and what respects its church, presumably listed building, what works and helps present the listed building the best. And then you look at what tree species you think will fit that. So, I'd suggest
You would have
experts to have a look.
Yes.
I wouldn't like to see just a list of tree species and say these might be suitable.
Yeah.
Because it's not as simple as that. I really feel quite strongly about this. But there are many trees planted that are insuitable, inappropriate. And a lot of the large trees that we're losing throughout the whole of the country, particularly in urban areas, are not being replaced with large growing species. They're being replaced with smaller growing species. And we're very lucky that we've got these amazing trees in our towns and cities. A legacy that, from the Victorians, when they very carefully and slowly built out these towns. It's kind of hard to get your head around it when you see a building site now, how heavy the machinery is, how they destroy the soil. When you think they didn't have those giant machines in the day, everything was low, so the actual soil wasn't compacted, it wasn't destroyed, the buildings were a lot cleaner. If you think about it, it was just things were carried by horses and men and carts. So now it's not like that, everything just comes onto site, huge bits of machinery, stuff stored everywhere, all the soil structures destroyed, there's cement dust everywhere and all sorts. So it's very difficult now to get new trees into development sites and get them to grow successfully. If you ever go out on a development site, usually when they're about to stick the trees in, you'll see what they do. There's usually a small channel, they throw some topsoil in and plant a tree in it. And then they wonder why they sit there and don't grow for 6 or 7 years and then slowly die after about 10 years. Because there's just no soil for them to grow in. So that brings me nicely on to the Cotston Road development, where we've negotiated quite well, I think, to get trees in the street seen. It thinks the county, what used to be county highways, are still very anti-tree. They don't want to adopt any trees on the footpath or on the road or in their adoptable area. We're still working on them. So it looks like the trees are going to be somehow either in the management company that we set up to look after the footpath, or they'll be part of the red line around the individual properties and they'll be responsible for them. But underground, we're going to have, I suppose it's like a crating system. So we'll be building up using these crates underground that suspend, you can sort of suspend a hard surface on top of them. And they provide an area for uncompacted soil, and then we'll fill that up with nice tree soil, which is mostly sand with a small amount of organic material in it, perfect for tree growth. And we'll be planting the trees in then. And it's all about getting enough soil volume for the trees to grow. So we've got to choose the right species of tree that will grow within the soil volume and give, maybe 50, 60 years worth of growth. And then in time, the trees will just have to be replaced. And just have to accept that we're probably not going to get massive trees in the streets like we used to, because the soil under the road and the footpaths now is just destroyed. So we're having to make like bespoke tree rooting environments.
So are you recommending appropriate species?
I'm in negotiation with the developer as we speak. Well, I want the area to have a sense of place. So you've got a lot of redwood trees in Handel.
A lot of
Redwood trees,
Yes,
large
we
redwood trees, quite a few Wellingtonians, and really nice. And there's a small green going to be on the new development, and I'm going to try and get redwoods on there, but I'm going to try and get slightly different species called Metasequoia, Strobordis, and it's a dawn redwood, but it's a deciduous redwood, and there are a few of those as well. And I think that would be a nice link to the town. But what I want to have is the street trees that are going to run all the way down sort of Spine Road. I'd like to have 2 different species and something a little bit more ornamental. So when you come into that area in 10 years' time when the trees have grown a bit, it will have a feel. You'll know you're there. It'll be distinctive. Because, design of houses is going to be rubbish. It's just going to be usual developer claptrap. We're pushing them really hard on materials as best we can. And it's very, very difficult dealing with the major house builders. We made them work a lot harder on this site than we did before. The planning officer actually lives in Handel and is very passionate about it. So I think so far we've done an okay job on that site anyway. I know there's the issue with the ash tree that I'm trying to stay out of really. But that's how it's going on that side. And so around the perimeter of the site, where there's lots and lots of open space, and obviously there's reasons they can't use that space, we're going to be using more native species, so which will be sort of, if you think, the sort of threshold between the development of the built area and moving out to the countryside, and I'll try and keep that. But when we get into the more built areas, I'd rather see more ornamental tree species. And there's two reasons for that. Obviously, they're a bit brighter. You get, you have nicer flowers, nicer autumn colour, and a lot more distinctive, unusual shapes, if you like, striking, visually attractive things. But also, they cope better with that very unnatural environment you're planting them into. Native trees like being out in the countryside with their friends. They don't like being stuck in hard urban areas where the sun's coming off all the hard surfaces and they're struggling. So that's more ornamental trees from different parts of the world. They do better in areas like that. And to most people, they just see a tree, so they don't know what it is. So,
Good, that
is
sounds
that okay,
good.
answer?
Interesting.
Have we got more questions? If not, I really must thank you for that. I've
Okay. I was going to chat about
sat in this committee for more years than I care to think about, and I've found out one of the most informative things we've ever had.
Yeah.
Is it possible for you to let Lisa have that presentation so that
Yeah,
she
no
can print off
That'd be brilliant.
copies for us?
Yeah.
I personally would love a copy of that,
Yeah, no.
as a hard copy that we could keep.
Yeah, no problem, yeah. So, yeah, no, that's great. I was going to chat about Pexley Court. I've still got a few reservations about that one at the moment. And again, it's mostly to do with the proximity of the trees. I just don't know if, in the long term, there's going to be a sustainable relationship between the new property and the trees. But the two trees that I'm mostly worried about, they're not the best trees. So in the long run, it may be that I might chat to them and see whether we can get a couple of more of the trees removed and plant new trees as part of the planning application. And then what we do, we protect those with new tree preservation order. So I think in 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years time, that'll be a better result than trying to retain, these fairly average trees, the walnut and sycamore. That's my own view. I think that'd be better in the long run. And that's what you've got to think when you're doing trees. You're sort of planning for the future. And the decision that you make now might seem the right thing to do right now to retain the tree, but if it's going to be an unsustainable relationship, by that I mean that if somebody new buys the house, they sell it, somebody else moves in who doesn't like trees, they apply to fell the tree, I refuse them, they appeal, I think I'd lose the appeal. Don't think an inspector would say, a tree that close to the new development is sustainable. I think they can say it will be too much of an impact on their use and enjoyment of their property. So I'd rather change that now, get something that is going to be less impact, but also have a lot of good amenity value. I guess really what I want to try and get across to you is, I want you to trust me to do the best thing for your town from a trees and landscape point of view. That's kind of what I want to do. But I'm new and it's going to take time, so you're going to see my decisions as they go. I think I've refused more applications already in 2 years than my predecessors did in about 10. So, okay. But thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank
And
you.
most of us are pretty reassured at your approach. Let's put it that way.
So are you saying that we too often write on our, which we will be doing people wanting to
We
crown
might change
trees?
our little internal planning guidance document.
I didn't really go into that, but you live here, it's your town, you see these applications. I don't know if you go and look at them, I don't know what in detail you do, but if you're concerned about something, let me know. I didn't start going into tree work. Generally speaking, if a tree's never been pruned harshly before, like reducing inside, it's bad. It's really bad. It destroys the shape of the tree. It harms the tree. It causes
That's what we
decay in
get,
the ground.
isn't it? All the time.
Yeah, and I've never seen as much of it as I've come to Northamptonshire.
Yes.
Protection. And so, where the tree hasn't been reduced before, I'm trying to avoid it. But a lot of the trees have already been reduced. So, if you see something you're uncomfortable with, I'd rather you put down, we object to this, or we feel we're not comfortable with this, or we feel an alternative would be this. That's fine in your comments. I'm happy with that. And I'll address them. And if I disagree with you, I'll write to Lisa and I'll let you know why.
Yeah.
Excellent,
Like that.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, really
excellent.
good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Myself in there.
We'll
Don't know how it goes.
get back to them.
Don't know how it goes.
No, I'm just gonna try that.
We probably should.
Thanks a lot, nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice
Nice
to
to meet
put
you.
a face to a name now.
Yeah. It's nice to meet you all.
Thank you.
And I'll be in touch.
Yes, yeah. No problem at all.
I'll resume in these meetings, we're scrubbing around on the floor trying to
Yeah.
get technology.
You're all right then.
I can't remember which one.
There's nothing we're not
Matching the eye.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you, Brian.
I think we might adopt a slightly different approach.
You know, we don't know, just make it would help.
Thank you.
Thank you. You know to get out. Thanks for doing it. Really.
Cheers.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Right, well, to get back to our bread and butter work, the next item on the agenda is declarations of interests. There are remarkably few planning applications tonight, but quite a lot of other stuff on the agenda. Does anybody have anything to declare, either disposal, pecuniary interest, or any other interest? The application in respect of 19 West Street is by Mr and Mrs George Backhurst, with whom I am reasonably acquainted. The application in respect of 2 Herne Road by Mr Dilliston, I am professionally acquainted with, as another solicitor.
And I say hello.
So I suppose I should mention it for the record. Minutes of the last meeting, which was the one on the 4th of January, have already been circulated. Present myself, Councillor Chesser, Councillor Fuller, Councillor Arnold and Councillor Davis. Can I sign those as a true records?
Yes.
Yes. Councillor Davis, Councillor Chesser, all those in favour? Right. Right, now, the actual planning applications themselves, the first is in relation to 19 West Street, which could almost as equally have been described, I think, as 1780 and 19 West Street.
Yes.
This property lies within the conservation area. It's a grade 2 listed 17th century building. And it's a retrospective application, which always gets it off to a bad start. Particularly gets it off to a bad start when it relates to a listed building, as this is. And it's to do with the replacement of wooden single glazed windows with UPVC double glazed units of, it says on here, almost identical wood grain finish and design. There are some photographs, kind of before and after photographs, you can look at. So, if you can look at the
This
those for a moment.
Yeah.
One of them, I think that's the most informative.
The top 2 that say photos are probably the best. They give a very good.
Yeah,
Those
Those 2, yeah.
There's 2 which are nice.
So that's the new.
Yeah.
Look.
And the one next to it's the old one, isn't it?
Yeah.
So they've gone from wooden to plastic.
So the one that that's it.
Right. Now, so the ones that are marked,
They're the new ones.
or across the top, the one at the dormer, as it were, are the ones that they are applying to change, having already done it. Interestingly enough, there were two statutory consultee comments on the portal. The county archaeological advisor doesn't work. However, the Society for the Protection of Ancient Buildings is incandescent. I don't think it's any exaggeration to say they're extremely unhappy. They describe the work as, quote unquote, extremely unacceptable. And they set out why they say that. They start by complaining that when somebody takes it out in the way that's happened here, of course, no expert gets to go and have a look at it to see what was there in the first place. So they can't be absolutely sure, if you like, the value of what has been stroke may have been lost. They make a kind of further point out of all of this, though, that from what they can see from the photographic evidence, whilst there was some rot in the wooden windows, they believe that they would have been easily repairable, and that that's essentially what should have been done. And you may recall, it wasn't that long ago, that we were looking at the upstairs windows in the bookshop, where a similar issue arose, and we got an objection to what was being proposed initially, because they had wanted to replace things, and the expert evidence suggested, look, you shouldn't be replacing it. You should really try to retain as much original material as you possibly can. That's part of the value of the thing. So the Society for Protecting Ancient Buildings is disgruntled that instead of simply is a bit unfair, instead of repairing what was there on a kind of like-for-like basis, the owners commissioned Everest to make bespoke windows. I'm sure that was extremely expensive for that to be done. The society says that actually the way they've been done means it's not really as like-for-like as the applicant suggests. They say, for example, that originally 3 of the 4 windows to the first floor of the front elevation were timber bays with distinctive horizontal sliding sashes, remaining window being a smaller horizontal sliding sash, and the door window a timber casement. And essentially what they say is that's not what you get now with what we have. And what they essentially say is, look, what should have happened is they should have replaced it with single glazed wooden frames, if it had to be replaced, potentially with secondary glazing inside of a kind of an approved style. Their approach, however, seems to me to be relatively pragmatic, in as much as what they are saying is, look, rather than require them to rip out what they've put in when they are brand new, perfectly functional windows, what could be done would be to grant permission retrospectively, but subject to a condition, effectively saying that after a period, presumably the anticipated lifetime of these windows, when they are replaced, you have to go back to wooden frames, single glazed, with secondary glazing, in order to recreate as far as is possible what was there before this work happened. But they certainly are very clear that they don't feel that retrospective permission should be given. Now, I'm no expert, but I read that and thought there appears to me to be a lot in what they are saying. maybe that the conservation officer will take a different approach, mindful of the fact that the county archaeological officer doesn't seem to be that upset. Wouldn't seem to be upset at all with it. But intrinsically to me, it seems that not replacing on a like-for-like basis in a listed building in a conservation area, which is actually an extremely important part of the whole, in this way, without, in effect, therefore, consultation in advance with the conservation officer to come up with the best possible scheme, is something that should not happen. Now, whether there's something in the paperwork that made it appear as if the applicants weren't aware that the building was listed. I have to say I find that slightly difficult to believe. And even if they didn't, they should have done. And it's pointed out by the society that a company like Everest would undoubtedly have said, you ought to check this before you do anything. And I'm sure they would have done. So it does rather look as if they assumed that it would be all right, nobody would do anything. I suspect, but it is entire guesswork, that something then happened which has prompted them to put in the retrospective application. We have a policy that basically says we deplore all retrospective applications and append suitable wording to our responses in all cases, which no doubt we will do. But the question is, do we feel as concerned by what has happened and what we've ended up with as the society does, or do we take the view that actually they look okay and we shouldn't be that worried about it? That's a suggest.
I feel very, very disappointed because the gentleman who's making this application has, I think, had dealings with this committee in the past. And I think he would know. I don't think there would be any reason for him not to know that it's listed. And from our point of view, we do, rather like the house in St Osiris Lane, owned by the chapel that wants to put not the right slates on the roof. I think we've got to be consistent in our views about not letting people ride roughshod, if you like, over the legislation.
Yeah, what actually are the options? Can we, well, I guess not we, but can we say, look, you've got to take it out and,
Well, I think the short answer is one could object and invite the enforcement officer to take enforcement action, which could include requiring its immediate removal and replacement. And that's going further than the society has suggested, but that is clearly an option.
I think I would agree with that. I think what's to stop, considering that's in the middle of the street as well, what's to stop a house opposite saying, well, they've done it, or, yeah.
It is the point that these people made, that they felt it would set a precedent if this wasn't dealt with robustly. It wasn't quite the language they used, but it's certainly they referred to the precedent that it sets, and that in a sense is the same point that Councillor Chester was making a moment or two ago.
I'm certainly in two minds about it at the moment. I think in support of them, I would say, number one, that those windows are of course more environmentally better than single glazed windows. But also they're a local business who will suffer the hit, I'm sure, if they were made to replace them, and also might have been suffering an energy hit as well, having single glazed windows. However, I also understand that there's a conservation order, and Elbow is a very special place, and precedents of things we don't want to set really in this. And of course, I think I do agree. They really ought to have known that this is a listed building, and ought to have known that you can't just rip out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 windows on a high street in an ancient town and expect to get away with it.
Yeah.
So on that basis, even though I might agree with some of the secondary reasons why it's a good thing, I think we need to act well object. I think on this, but I do, I think that's where I'm at with this.
So Davis, do you wish to express a view?
Yeah, I think just to probably concur with what others have said, that listed status is not difficult to find. I just found it 18th of June 1955.
Sorry,
It was 18th of June 1955, it was given listed status.
So it's been that way for over 65 years.
absolutely.
Circa 17th century, low two-storey with steep old stone slate roof, 3 two-storey canted bays, glazing bars to the first floor, 1 sliding sash window over carriage door to the right, 2 doors, 1 hip door to the right. So it's actually quite specific. So a couple of things for me. If you own that premises in West Street, you should be aware of what it's in the conservation area.
Absolutely.
Buildings around you are all subject or of similar age or whatever, or have been. They've all been pubs, they've all been sort of whatever they are, almshouses or whatever. And I think it's, when you read the documentation, it says really think it was listed, I think they probably should have done a bit more work before they just embarked on replacing windows of that ilk. I get the fact that I'm sympathetic around their plight of wanting to probably make the house more energy efficient, but there are ways of doing that, and I think they've done it the wrong way around. And if that means we oppose it and planning enforcement within Northamptonshire choose to take action against them, then that is down to Northamptonshire, but I don't think we can agree with their course of action they're taking with the house.
Well, that seems clear enough. I mean, that seems to be the view of all of us. I'll try and draft some wording we still have it. Right. Now, interestingly enough, following what we've just been hearing from the tree officer earlier, we have a tree application. We notice it has TCA on it, which of course means it's here because it's a tree in a conservation area. We know from what he's told us that this is notice to us, it's not an application as such. We see that it says essentially it just wants to do some works to a sycamore and a hornbeam. And I have to say that actually when you go on the portal, you really can't divine anything much about it, other than the fact that we can see who the applicant is, and we can see that the agent is James Rowlett, who we all know of. But there isn't anything there to tell us why it's being done at all. Or we can only sort of muse on it. Now, our original planning guidance document would suggest that this being in the nature, it would appear a tree husbandry, that we wouldn't object to it, although we'd invite the tree officer to consider it. Having heard the tree officer, it's apparent that in reality, effectively, the local authority has to acquiesce to what is being done, unless it takes the view that the tree or trees concerned are so significant in whatever way, that actually you should put a TPO on them, which will then enable you to legally restrict what can and cannot be done to them, if I've understood what we just heard properly. Now that then begs the question, because I can't particularly envisage that particular trees. I note that we're told that perhaps the type of tree doesn't necessarily matter as much as perhaps I thought it might have done. In other words, one might be particularly concerned about the loss of an apparently healthy ash or elm, for example, because of the problems that those trees have had. So it looks as if it's more to do with the not only the type of tree, but very much its location and all the surrounding factors. And of course, what would make that so much easier would be if the applicants were forced to provide photographs so that one could actually see the tree and form some kind of a view about it. So I don't know quite where that leaves us in connection with this, because we can't, I don't think, end up saying every time we get one of these, go and list it. I think we should only be doing that when we think very strongly that there are good grounds for it, and we can actually articulate those grounds to the tree officer and say, on this occasion, go out and look at it because. Now, sadly, I suspect that might actually means that probably when we get applications like this, the only thing to do is to go and look at them. But the trouble is, I'll be looking at it with my eyes, and you'd be looking at it with yours, not 30 years worth of experience, as we were hearing from us this evening, so that we may not be that good at getting it right. On the other hand, I do get the impression that he'd rather that we put something before him if we felt that we should be doing,
I think
and then he can exercise his own professional judgment about it.
It might be that we would think we wouldn't want to interfere with the hornbeam, because that is a much rarer species, which is the one that's
T2.
T2.
And the interesting thing about that
The
is,
sycamores by the garage, and
Yeah.
I could see there might be a case for saying you want to cut that back a bit.
and I did pick up on what he said, mainly because I remembered this application, it's on our agenda, about reducing the size of trees. Now, that isn't always such a good idea, if it hasn't been done before, because it can adversely impact the tree.
I've got the trees on this.
Oh, okay.
Right,
That's T,
That's T1.
that's
Is
T.
that no? T2.
T2,
T2 is the one on the.
And he wants to go up with it, doesn't he? So one's at 4 metres, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah. So he wants to go 4 metres on one, isn't it? And then how far
5
on
on
the
the other, I think.
5.2.
5.2 on this one, which is,
on the hornbeam,
Must be
you
that.
also thin it out.
that's,
The hornbeam's the one
That's
on the road.
that's the
Hornbeam's
one,
the
maybe.
closest to it.
And then
The
that's
one,
the
the one closest to the road is the
Yeah, the one's a sycamore.
I don't know how old that picture is.
I mean, it's
Yeah,
not
yeah.
blocking anything, it's not actually, I mean, I drive past it every day of my life, or walk past it. It's not blocking anything or shading anything.
And of course, as I say, there's absolutely nothing on there to tell us the
why.
why of it.
It was
But
the
it's
why,
not,
wasn't it?
but it's not required
Yeah, but yeah.
for this type of application.
Why is
If it was
that,
a-
we have
if
to
it was a
ask
T-
why then.
If it was a TPO on it,
Yeah.
then the why becomes part of the application.
Yeah. I think this might be the one we do have to move to the trees. Well, he did express a view, didn't he?
I think, subject to anybody else's view, it seems to me that perhaps particularly with regard to the hornbeam, we might be saying, look, we're not sure about this.
Is it necessary?
And if this would adversely impact the tree, and if it's felt that this is quite a significant tree, and it's a nice tree where it is, then maybe there is a case. And eventually, if we get to this point frequently enough, hopefully our decision making will get better. Because if we say that we think we should, he's telling us, look, if I don't think you should, I will tell you, but I'll tell you why.
Yeah.
And that way we'll start to get better at this. My suggestion is that we indicate that we have no objection in relation to the sycamore, but that we think that we should take a look at whether or not the hornbeam would justify a TPO, and therefore control over what happens to that tree. And if he says, actually no, fair enough.
he knows that we know that we need to trust him.
But he's just asked us to
He's
do
just
that.
asked us to do it.
And I think he
It
would
could be a
appreciate.
good way of learning as well.
Yeah.
Exactly, I think it is going to be a bit of a learning process, because I've learned more about trees today in the context of planning than I've known, having sat on this committee for 30 years. Unless anybody has
So I'm
any.
just trying to understand what we're thinking of doing. Sorry, can you explain that to me again?
Well, I mean, literally, what you see on the agenda is virtually all that you find on the paperwork.
Yes.
Yeah. So they want to thin it by 10%,
Yes.
which may be an issue. And they want to crown lift over the highway, in other words, raise the height of the thing
Yes.
to 5.2 metres, which is obviously quite high.
Yeah, it sounds like that might, I don't know, they don't need reasons, but that sounds a bit like a reason, doesn't it, that presumably to allow.
Well, it sort of
But
impliedly suggests
Yes.
that's our rationale
Yeah.
behind it, but just because you've got a rationale doesn't necessarily mean that it's appropriate.
I'm very sensitive to trees in general, and that each tree is protected in my mind. I personally don't feel comfortable with this yet, so I don't really know the reasons why these things need to be done from what's being seen. And so I'm not tempted to okay it at all.
It's sort
I think we have to,
happens,
unfortunately,
yes.
given what he said, we have to put out of our mind for applications of this nature, not
Reasons.
TPOs.
Yeah.
The reason is not actually part of the decision-making process. It's the impact of what happened in the nature of the tree, its location, etc., etc. And I guess it's a slightly more interesting tree in an interesting location, bearing again in mind where it is relative to what we see up there. So I think we should, as it were, invite the tree officer to look at that and look at whether the correct response is to list the tree and then organise the most appropriate way of any tree husbandry, rather than simply permitting this to be done. And if you disagree, as he said to us earlier, tell us why.
Yes, in a way, having a dialogue with the tree man is a good thing, because they may take the view, let's just say yes to all these things, and then we've lost the trees.
We've got to be so careful.
You know,
with them.
if we're
We've got to
showing
be so
care,
careful with them.
specific care for the trees, we get a better deal, don't we?
Well, yes, and it sounds as if his approach is relatively robust.
Yeah.
He's telling us that he's refused more applications in 2 years than his predecessor did in 10. And he's obviously very enthusiastic about the trees in this town, in this area. Right, so no objection to T1, no objection to T2, and I think given the slightly unusual nature of this, I've got to drive that one as well. It's a good job there aren't that many applications here tonight, isn't it? Right, the next one, I didn't realise that this application existed until Lisa pointed out to me that I hadn't actually done my usual report in connection with it. And then I became aware that this application had come in extremely late. And as a result, I hadn't seen it. But I have now. And I did email everybody, but I have to say it was after 7 p.m. this evening. A short response to this. So it's probably just as easy if I read it out, but it will be worth bringing up the plans to this because it will help you fix it a little bit better.
Before you read it, could you tell me where Benefit Court is?
Right, Benefit Court is immediately opposite
Opposite drill
the
ball.
drill
Oh,
ball.
right, is that, yeah, thank you.
So, yeah. So it's apparently, it's not in the conservation area, but the way it's put is that the front is, provides setting for the conservation area, and given where it is, you still to get understanding that. although it's described as single-storey rear extension, changes to fenestration and larger rear terrace, actually, it may be better to have described it as single-storey rear extension and changes to the doors at the front. So, in relation to the doors at the front, the current doors to the property are UPVC. The proposal is that the front door and the garage door, which are recessed under an overhang, would actually become glazed behind, well, the front door will be glazed behind a grill. Which is a metal grill. What is described on that as the store door, but I think is actually probably the garage door. That would also be behind some form of metal type grill, in dark grey and black. Well, which is not glazed. To the rear, there is going to be on the ground floor doors in dark grey, stroke black, powder coated. So they describe it here, crystal like panel, so I didn't actually know what that meant, with two double doors. There is a first and a second floor. The first floor, the idea is to put in some new sliding doors which will open out onto a roof terrace. And the terrace itself will have a dark grey or black painted privacy screen. The second story, there's a door which essentially is opening out onto a Juliet balcony with a similar type of privacy screen. I couldn't find anything on here which really helped us very much about the roofing materials to the extension, but it's going to be built essentially out of the same materials in terms of the walls as currently to match. And there were no comments on the portal at about 7 o'clock this evening. And there you get a picture of it. I have to say, it's not the easiest set of pictures to follow these ones. I do wonder a bit about these doors at the front, because it is quite a sensitive building where it is. It's the old sort of Francis and Marshall site.
What would be the benefit of it? I mean, the front bit's so small.
It's all very strange to me to have that kind of appearance at the front, but it is, I mean, it is in a sense decorative. One may say that it's a matter of opinion. Some people may like it, some people may not. But I do think that actually it's a relatively sensitive building, a relatively sensitive place. Being in the conservation area, I do think that its appearance matters, so to speak. In terms of the extension at the back, actually, strangely enough, given that it's going to be in similar materials, and looking at it, I didn't think that there was necessarily going to be any massive issue around overlooking, but I couldn't really be too sure. The screen looks more like a kind of, it doesn't look as if it's solid. So it looks as if you could look through it from the roof, what's described as the roof terrace, and quite what the terrace is made of, the upstairs has yet been decided. Whether you could look through that and from there into the garden of any neighbouring property, it's difficult to gauge. Or indeed whether you could look over the top of it and into a neighbouring property. Certainly, I think you would do so if you were standing, if you were sitting down at a table on the
Are there properties at the back, or?
There's nothing behind
Is
it.
the Feffy land behind, is it not?
I can't remember. whether it's theirs. But yes, it's open land at the back that runs all the way down to Stoke Door Road.
Yes, it might get,
Well, that's another
That's
issue
right.
for another day. But, of course, it is in a terrace. And therefore, potentially, you can look from there. If you bring up the location plan, you can see, put it in context. In fact, if you look at the site plan, you can see the, is that the location plan or the site plan?
Site
I
plan.
think that's the site plan. It was the site plan. Yeah. So,
Both what you're saying, actually.
It's very hard to tell the difference.
It is,
yeah, the difference between the location plan and the site plan is marginal, but you can actually see a shaded area, which I think is the extension.
And that's the third.
So as you can see, it's a very long plot going backwards. But you can also see that it's part of a terrace, sort of running out of town along the Bennefield Road. There it is opposite what is still described as the drill hall on that particular plan. So query whether from there it is actually possible to overlook any of the adjoining, or the immediately adjoining.
Well, one of the
properties.
drawings, Chair, says that there's going to be a privacy screening.
Yeah, but if you look at that privacy screen, I mean, it doesn't look
Privacy screening.
that high.
Well, it says 5930 to the top, so I'm assuming that. That was from obviously ground floor to the
Yeah.
top of it.
You see,
So not
I think
that-
it might
not
give
that-
privacy to the people on the terrace, on the roof terrace. But whether it gives privacy to people living
Here.
in adjoining properties from the people on the terrace being able to look down into them is another matter. And of course, if you actually put up screening that was so high that you couldn't do that, then it rather negates the idea, frankly, of having a roof terrace, you think. So, what do people feel?
These houses are in the conservation area, aren't they?
No,
No.
they're
But
just on the edge of it.
That's the view of them from Stoke Door Road, so
Yeah, you
they
can
could
see
go across the back.
the open land.
It would stand out quite a bit, but I don't know if that makes any matter. It's one of these ones, I think it's that one with the
It's that one.
solar panels.
That's Karen's, it's that one next door, it's this one.
Right.
Yeah.
So they've got panels, I think, or the plans with panels in, the drawing's got panels on it, doesn't it, so.
Yes,
That
I
one
mean,
with
that,
three layers of
that sort of
panels.
shaded area.
Yeah. So it's, yes, it's that one there.
So this, which looks more like metal railings, but it might, it's described as the privacy screen, which is there,
Yeah.
and you've got the triple sort of sliding door effort there, and this kind of roof terrace area. And then you've got the sort of Juliet balcony there with another door. And of course that's therefore up at quite a height. So that,
It's that one.
now there isn't on the board any objections from neighbours, but the application's only come in relatively recently, so that's perhaps not necessarily significant.
Yeah, looking at next door, they've done a similar thing.
They've actually got a balcony,
And they've got a balcony
they've
next
got a
door.
balcony next door with a wall.
so by the time they finish
So
the
the best
build
chance
up of some sort
Right,
or another.
I don't remember that balcony application, but I'm sure there probably was, I'm sure it was all done
I
properly.
don't,
The standalone house next door on the right has one.
Well, they're all semi-detached, that's it, but
It's the one with the 3 layers of solar panels rather than 2 layers.
Mm.
it's such a mess, isn't it? Solid.
That's a very professional way of looking at it, isn't it? Yeah. Oh,
This lady,
can't be bothered.
They all just have different things, I mean,
Yeah,
it's,
my initial
that's
feeling is not
2012.
it's to allow physical art.
Anybody got any issues about what they're planning to do on the front of the door?
I'm more about in the sense that the block was built and the look of it must have been taken into account with the planning.
Oh, yeah.
Because It's built in this sort of stony
You know,
style.
it's the one with the silver car at the front. Have you seen that? That's number 3, the one with the silver car park.
So currently there's a brown garage door,
Mm.
and a green door next door, and a black door, isn't there? So somebody got.
Yes.
So are they bringing it right to the front?
No,
Yeah.
but they're simply replacing it
With another garage door.
with a different style
Well,
of door
garage door.
that is described as having this metal grill effect.
So it's going to look a bit like a, well,
It's going to look like a commercial
or a
property.
jail. Yeah.
Yeah, you wonder what,
It'd be nice to
So it's the aesthetics as opposed to any.
It's the aesthetics, given that it's part of a group
yeah,
and it's out of line with the group, and given its location on the edge of the conservation area. That would be my
yeah, we could.
concern about the frontage.
I just don't know why.
Yeah, that's,
I
yeah.
just don't know why.
When they are all the same
They're
level,
all
aren't they?
Presumably it gives them just a little bit of porch, private porch, behind the grill.
All the garage doors are the same colour.
doesn't
So
it?
is the grill coming forward then?
Well, it doesn't appear, I
looks
don't
like-
think
That's what
so.
you're thinking.
Yeah, it looks like the grill is flush with the front of the house, whereas the garage doors aren't flush with the front.
I see what you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So will they get a tiny bit
they're
of
taking a
porch?
bit more space, as it
Yeah.
were, in terms.
Oh, well, filling that gap in.
Yeah.
Yeah, underneath the number.
That's
Oh,
what
you
I
might be
think.
right, yeah. Well, that would make marginally more sense. Doesn't alter the fact that it's,
Yes, it would do, because the front doors are at an angle, but the front doors aren't parallel to the wall, but kind of nestled in, can you see? So it'd give them a huge porch. Well, not a huge porch, it'd give them a porch.
Yeah,
behind the
oh
front
yes,
door.
because there's a door on the side.
The doors are at an angle rather than flat on.
They may be taking that in. It's
So that
my,
would
it's
be
my
why I raised
thought.
well,
it.
Same, it's not clear with regard to that.
well,
Yeah.
I get the impression that we've decided not to worry about what we're doing at the back. So the
Yeah.
extension's fine, it's purely this issue around the change.
Uniformity of design.
Yes, the uniformity.
I think we should flag it up, but we're not happy with it.
Yeah.
And see where it takes us.
Personally, I just think I'd like to see more what it would actually look like.
Yeah, I need an artist's impression. don't you?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
With
Well, we
colours.
could say that we because it's not that easy to work out from the plans and drawings supplied. Our concern is that the visual impact on the block itself and given its proximity to the
Yeah.
conservation area
Yeah.
makes us feel that that bit of the work shouldn't in fact be permitted. Let's see.
No,
Well, it looks-
no,
yeah.
no.
It looks like, I think they're going to turn the front door, into a window.
Yeah, I don't know,
I've missed that. They're going to turn the front door into a
it
window.
says metal grille clad front door and store door and panel.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Painted dark grey stroke black, the front door glazed behind the grille.
And they're going to turn what seems to be the current front door into a new dark grey black powder coated window.
So they're
Can't see
flipping, I get the impression what they're doing is, so currently you've got the front door on the left and you've got a garage door.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
They're flipping it, so they're putting a powder coated window on the left, which is where the front door is. So where the front door is, they're putting a powder coated window, and they create a new front door. That's
That's how you read it.
that's how I read.
I think that's what
Yeah,
it's
because
saying.
it's
What they've
saying-
got there.
New dark, so the left hand side, new dark grey powder coated window, left hand side where the door is. And where the garage door is, they're making the front door glazed behind the grill.
Right.
Carry on.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's the crucial bit, isn't it? So lose the garage.
Tempted to
So
say.
on the garage,
Well-
yes, and that's right, that's what they're doing. They're
That's the
doing
key, losing the garage.
So I think it's a room, presumably. that's not very.
Well, it's
we're not
certainly
saying
not
anything
what the application certainly doesn't suggest that,
but that is what's
if
happening.
that's what's ultimately
And it's
behind
only
it.
with the garage doors and. So, yeah.
Well, one way of preventing that happening, of course, would be to argue that we do object to that change. Because if they can't get that change, they certainly couldn't change the garage in that way. Not without coming back and making a specific application.
Yeah.
So,
The proposed change to the frontage is to the front door and garage door. The vast majority of conservation frontage is done. The front door and garage door are recessed and below. The change to the appearance of the front door and garage door will not affect the conservation area setting. Okay, that's what we're doing.
yeah, except that whilst they say it doesn't affect the conservation area setting, I'm not convinced that it doesn't, personally. All right, I think we have to come to a conclusion on this one. Does anybody want us to object to what's proposed at the front? I certainly would.
I thought people were objecting, has that all changed?
No, I'm just trying to actually ascertain whether that is.
I would agree, actually, I think for two reasons. I would object to the front for two reasons. Number one, it seems completely out of kilter with everybody else. And number two, I feel like it sounds to me like they're trying to get rid of the garage, from what I can gather. That seems to be how I'm interpreting the thing here. And so they're not being straightforward with that. Because they are getting rid of any kind of garage doors, so obviously that room is going to become a new room.
With a bin store in the hallway, it's going to be a new hallway and a bin store, which is completely different to what it's currently.
Yeah.
Is that what they're saying? They have said that, so,
Yeah.
right, most I see.
So this is a slider, bin store on the right, and then a hall, because
It's turning the hall out.
that's where the front door was. That's
Right,
garage,
okay.
it's going to be a window. And you're
It's going to
coming
be a
here.
big through room.
Yeah, I see, okay,
So-
all right, well, okay. Okay, well then, I still struggle to see why the frontage has to be so different from everybody else's. And a property like that.
I agree, if you built it as part of a structure,
If it was a standalone
It'd be like-
property, that might be a different
it would
issue.
be like
but-
Downing Street and suddenly building a porch out.
Yeah.
So, do you know what I mean?
But it's not
And you
conservation.
somebody mentioned Downing Street.
Yeah, right, yeah. Well, that's
That's big tonight, isn't it?
I may object to the planning on the front, because of the visuals of it.
I think we're
I'm
not happy about
I'm happy with the back, I think that's fair.
that. Okay, that's quite complicated, you know what, I might as well go on. All right, good. Good heavens, I didn't think it would take us half an hour to do the planning applications, but it did. Good job, Lorraine, great. Interestingly enough, when you, there's no, all of the applications were sort of objection type things from us, and they were all granted. So, moving on to the rest of the agenda, the next item is planning appeals. We received what I would describe as minimal notice of the fact that there was an appeal against the refusal of the application in respect of the former Abbott House residential home in Blackpool Road, which of course has been replaced with the new Abbott House behind it, and it's sat derelict for a long time. And that hearing will have come and gone. I don't know, Lisa, have you heard anything about the outcome of it?
No, I had a look today as well on the planning portal, but I
So
couldn't
I
see
think
it.
all we can say is hopefully the result will be known to us
So,
for the next meeting. I took a view which was that we'd already set out very clearly in relation to this application the reasons why we objected, which were multiple and went beyond the objections of the planning authority. So I didn't see there was anything new we could have added to it, so we shall see what the inspector made then. Planning advisory panel, and just by way of an update, it came before the full council at its last meeting, the terms of reference and so on that we looked at and come up with. Full council basically said get on with it. So it's now back here with a view to deciding, if you like, next steps. Clearly next steps seem to involve actually now starting to approach some folks to see if they would be interested in getting involved. Now the question obviously is, who do we approach? It struck me that Mark Benz, local architect, obviously Bancroft Associates, the person who drew up the design statement that we operate from, which is obviously not a councillor, he seemed an absolutely logical person to approach. I wondered about Tony Hoyle, who's the council's rights of way officer, but we've also seen him in various other capacities, and very much involved in the town. David Wood from Transition and Mark Pelton also, because they've both been very proactive in recent years, and David's an ex-councillor. After that, I started to wonder a little bit. I put down Carol Bancroft Turner from Amble Museum, because of course they do have an interest in, if you like, in things historic, and we don't now have the historic buildings group we used to have. Though you can make out a case for Amble Museum and or the Historical Society or what have you. And I did put down the possibility of somebody from the Friends of Amble Parish Church on the basis that applications certainly that might impact on the church might be useful to have their views. And Paul kindly came up with two other names. One is a Shahida Montgomery, the other Louise Simmons. And both of those are town planners. Both with Peterborough City Council, but they're local. I don't happen to know either of them. Paul obviously does. And it seems to me that having somebody like that, perhaps, if they're interested, that we could call on might be quite useful.
They were both approached following the meeting, so and they're both.
So they're
both happy to
I can't.
So I'm saying we don't have to rush at it.
No, we don't.
Fill in the slots.
Because after all, you recall that we said the dog doesn't, the tail doesn't wag the dog. We will decide what he does, when he does it, and so on. But on the other hand, to approach a pool of people and see who might be interested in becoming involved in this, because it doesn't necessarily ultimately mean that every person would be approached A would want to, or B, we would necessarily want them all to be looking at anything in particular.
I saw it that it was, if we get a particular planning application in, we might only go to, say, a couple of that group and say, you know, if it was a particular design, we might go to Mark. If it's a specific planning issue that we thought, ooh, don't like that, we might go to the planning officer. And then, as opposed to having them all in the same room and discussing it, where we've got 6 or 7 ideas, that's how I view it. We might only utilise 2 or 3 of them on a particular planning application that we felt actually their expertise is going to bring to the table.
Councillor Hall.
Given tonight's guest, does anyone know anyone who is an expert in
trees?
Well,
Because
Clay.
would be very useful.
Julia Clay's husband. He's the one that did all the tree planting for Peterborough.
Oh. Do you know?
Do you want me to ask him? Or
Right. Well, that
find out about it?
Yeah.
I thought of him actually.
Well, that's
I
it.
thought would be.
That's a very good thought on your part to think we should do that, and it's a good thought that you happen to know somebody who might fit the bill.
Okay, well, that's already given us a number of names. Let me just throw something else into the mix. This will not surprise some of you. Councillor Reichhold has suggested to me that one of the people that we should approach is former District Councillor Stern, because he was on the planning committee that chaired the planning committee with the Nnc. My only thought about that is that just because you chair the committee doesn't make you an expert in certain things. And I've chaired this committee. I'm certainly not an expert on historic buildings, I'm not an expert on construction, I'm not a town planner, I'm not anything. I've gained a certain amount of experience over the years because of what I do. And I don't know how useful somebody, it's not a personal thing, but somebody such as that would be. I guess the answer might be that if we suddenly found a scenario that developed and we thought, there's a person who might actually be able to help, well, of course, that might be the time to approach. But in terms of simply building up a panel, I'm also conscious of the fact you don't necessarily want to build up a panel of 20 people overnight that might start to become potentially unmanageable.
If I may, Chair, I think you mentioned professional people in their own right in the particular field that is planning. We've moved on from East Northants to North Northants, and the ideas are changing. So for me, I'd be reluctant to be inviting an ex-councillor, because he is a district councillor, onto a panel where actually it's almost like you're only relevant for a certain period of time, and perhaps we wanted to move it in a different direction in terms of what's moving forward and not actually looking back at what we previously had with East Northants. That's just my personal.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said for that.
Well, look, we've got a little sort of gaggle of names. Probably the best thing to do, because I don't necessarily know everybody's addresses, but I know some of them, and they're all relatively traceable. But if people could put names and addresses to Lisa, Lisa and I can perhaps devise a draft letter to go to these people, just to sound them out in the first instance, and take it from there.
Like that.
Okay, and obviously if in due course other names come to mind, well, by all means, float them at future meeting, and if it seems to the committee that that's a good idea, we can
I suppose at
add
some
them to the
point,
group.
we'll just have to wonder, there might be a talent out there, we just have no idea.
Absolutely.
You could have posed an ad out.
Well, that's the other thing.
We did have somebody who came to do on West Street.
He seemed quite interested, but I think he was quite interested in becoming a councillor, whether he's going to pursue that or not, but he might be somebody, but I don't know.
I know his name, I've got it somewhere, I think.
Yeah, we will have it somewhere.
Yeah.
So I imagine once these people meet, they might also know people.
But it's also possible, there's that they might be able to expand the group. And I suppose it's possible that using some of our outlets, shall we say, we could put a very small piece in that the planning committee has decided to, and then if somebody then contacted the council and said, gosh, that sounds right up my street, I'd be really interested in the biggest planner in the world, we might be very interested. Happily, well, there's a string of items on the agenda at this point. They're all in the nature, or at least the next three are, receiving things. So an update on correspondence from Staunch. Final consultation statement correspondence from Nnc, which it seems to be about possible purchase. To receive adoption of Lytham Park notice from Nnc, which we've done. Then to receive the CSA environmental ecological impact assessment document.
All 84 pages.
Runs to a lot of pages. It's an echoing binder of papers in my hand. And it says, and discuss concerns regarding proposed development and impact on local bat population. Now, this isn't quite as left field as it sounded. A resident in the St Peter's Road area is concerned that the development, and specifically the removal of a tree, the tree with which we are all incredibly familiar, the one that sits right in the middle of the access egress of the development site onto St Peter's Road, that this tree, that essentially the information that was given to the local authority was flawed, and that essentially this tree shouldn't go. I think that might summarise it down somewhat. I have to say, going back to the I'm not an expert bit, I certainly can't pretend that I've read my way through this. And I rather suspect that even if I did, I'm not quite sure that I would feel that much more confident about being able to take a view. But it does also seem possible, I suppose, that if this committee felt it appropriate, we could contact Nnc and say we have been approached by a local resident who has expressed the following concerns, all of which were set out in the email, and that we would therefore ask Nnc to come back to us in relation to those concerns and let us know basically whether, as a result of that, we propose to do anything. I can't really see another obvious way forward, unless anybody's got a better idea.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, I agree, I think we should.
I read part of it, there's a massive amount of, it seems like a massive amount of population in that area.
And having lived in that area for 30 years, I have to say that I didn't actually see that many bats flying around at night, but I did certainly see some where they were, as it were, coming from and going to. They were flying around my garden, I had no idea, but there certainly have been bats in that area.
We can talk to our bat expert.
Who's our bat expert?
What's her name? She's on, her name's just gone into a black hole, unfortunately. We do have one,
Right.
and she has brought things up before about the bats, particularly the churchyard.
If it occurs to you in due
I
course
will,
who this
yeah,
person is,
yes.
perhaps we
That's-
should.
It's an age thing, and age goes to black hole.
Happens to all of us.
Judy,
Um,
Judith,
We'll get into
she's
that.
definitely Judy.
There's probably a lot of Judys in there.
Well, not the kind of,
Admittedly, probably not only Judys who are bat experts, but I'm afraid that at the minute I can't work out who you're talking about.
Yes.
Anyway, once
There
you've
is a
worked it
woman
out,
in Arnold, who's a
um,
bat expert.
well, perhaps if we can work out who she is,
Well, we'll find, yes,
we can copy her into whatever it is that we then send to Nnc, saying that we understand that you're interested in all of this and know something about it. So we thought we'd make you aware that we're raising this.
yes, I think so.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, it'll come to you.
You'll probably know it too, you know.
Probably in the middle of the night.
Right. Now the next document says to receive reply from Nnc Principal Development Management Officer and discuss and decide next steps. I'm hoping that I've got the right response document.
It's just the response when we invited them to a meeting, them saying that
It's
they're
not like that.
incredibly busy.
No, I've got, yes, it's not like that at all. Yes, I think the next steps was that it didn't sound awfully encouraging on them being able to actually come to a meeting, which given how helpful
That
our
was,
guest
yeah.
earlier was a great change.
Yeah.
Coupled to which I'm sure that we would all have had a number of questions. I have to say, the presentation was so comprehensive that he answered all the questions practically that I thought of asking him.
before I got a chance to ask you. But perhaps what we should do is, if there are specific issues that any of us on this committee have, that we could perhaps draw them together, and when we've got enough of them, submit them en bloc through Lisa, and say, could you please perhaps provide us with whatever. And again, I'm not sure we can take that much further. I'm now confused because I thought there was another item, albeit I can't even find my paperwork on it. But you mentioned it earlier, Councillor Chesser, and that is the Nnc call for sites.
Yes.
Um,
You said it was on here.
Well, I thought it was, and now I've looked at it again and I'm thinking, no, it isn't. And I'm not sure why it wasn't.
Call for site.
There's a call for sites.
You may recall that ENC, in producing the local plan part 2, its sort of opening gambit was a call for sites, as indeed did this council when we were embarking on a neighbourhood plan. And it appears that Nnc have decided to operate a call for sites. Now, this is quite interesting, bearing in mind that the local plan part 2 is still before an inspector, but it's already, as far as this town is concerned, completely redundant, because the 3 allocated sites, 2 of them have got outline planning permission and 1 of them has got a planning application, all of which in one moment. The way it was written, I have to say, and I'm glad I haven't brought the thing with me, unfortunately, I thought I had, looked as if it was more targeted at landowners and developers than it was at town and parish councils. But I would have thought that Nnc would be interested in the views of this council on future land allocation. And what's even more important, I think this council would want to have some sort of an input into the process at an early stage. Because we are in a situation where, under the core spatial strategy, the number of houses that it said were the minimum number for Oundle was reached with the granting of the outline planning permissions on the 2 sites at Cotston Road and St Christopher's Drive, will be exceeded by the grant if it happens. By the grant of planning permission at Stoke-Law Road for it to happen. And of course, we're aware of 2 other significant sites, because they were both sites that we were promoting through our neighbourhood plan. One of them is the Biggin Estates land, that's land north of Benefit Road, a huge site, and the other is a smaller site, but nevertheless is a substantial site off Herne Road, running down between Herne Road and the bypass. And I would not be at all surprised to see planning applications in respect to both of those pieces of land, notwithstanding where we are with everything. And perhaps arguably on the basis that RNOTP is out of date, local plan part 2 hasn't even got past the inspector yet. So I think we're quite potentially vulnerable to development. Yeah, one could see that if we were suggesting sites, we'd probably be saying that in our view, if there was to be development, these sites shouldn't be developed prior to 2031 in line with the core spatial strategy. But if we are beginning to start thinking about sites for 2031 and beyond, isn't it a bit premature? Because I would argue it probably is. That suggests they're looking for sites sooner. I think we should probably say that actually we can't see any justification for any further significant development this side of 2031. But looking longer term, obviously there are those two sites that previously we thought were suitable. But we might want to give some thought going forward to anything else.
It's apparently to do with the Oxford-Cambridge link arc.
Right.
There is a government plan to fill the arc in
Yes.
with development, and that's why Northamptonshire is their favoured.
Yes. So that we end up with a continuous block between Cambridge
Absolutely,
and
yeah.
Oxfordshire, which is horrendous.
I was going to say, can we make any decisions about
We
this?
can't do anything
Or-
other than to flag it up, which I just done, and say, can we make sure that this is on the agenda for next time?
Yeah.
I've
Try and
just
find
found it in my junk box.
Ah, right, yes. It didn't end up in mine, but for whatever reason, we didn't seem to manage to get it. any
Apologies
further.
about that.
But I think it's not, I think the closing date's sometime in April. So I think we would have 2 meetings between now and then.
Okay.
So if we put it on the agenda for March and
March, yeah.
hopefully come up with something in April. It probably should, I mean, obviously it's of such significance that it will need to be a full council thing as well if possible. But if we put it on our agenda, we can go from there. I'm just beginning to wonder whether what I did was tell Emma to put it on full council agenda for next week, or sorry, the week after next, rather than for this one.
Having reached our
Quote unquote, quote.
yes, that will now be out the window.
Well, my fear is precisely that. Of course, you've got the whole issue of still around 5-year land supplies, and we've already seen, I know, for example, the big estates were sniffing around saying that in their view, there wasn't a 5-year land supply in the area, and therefore, and we could just see that that was a precursor to a full application, which I'm sure will come sooner or later. My fear is sooner. So we can't discuss it further, but we will have it on the agenda for next time because somehow or another it can end up on the agenda.
Do you want me to ask him to put it on the next full council so you've got plenty of time to discuss it? Or are you happy?
Well, let's put it on the full council agenda as well, in the sense it can come under planning. We can refer to it, we can say that we will be looking at it in March
Okay.
and in April, and if the timings work, I think they do, we may be able to get it into the April full council meeting before we have to actually submit anything, which I'm pretty sure it's the 20-something of April.
25th of April, it says here, yeah.
Right. Sorry, that slightly diverged from the agenda, mainly because I thought it was on the agenda and realised it wasn't. So, 2 items to go. The next one is, excuse me, attendance at a meeting on February the 21st, an Nnc regional planning meeting, where apparently there's going to be Road application to be looked at. This was brought to my attention by the Mayor. I suggested to the Mayor, who was quite keen that he go and speak, that whilst he could go and speak as a resident, I was entirely sure that given the circumstances, it was appropriate for him to speak on behalf of the council, if anybody was going to speak on behalf of the council. Simply to avoid putting him in a difficult position, really saying that he's misusing his position or anything else. But it does beg the question as to whether or not anybody could go. I think it's pretty unlikely I'm going to be in a position to go, but you would have to provide details. I think it's actually relatively late again. I haven't printed it off for some reason. But I've got in mind that it's literally days beforehand is the cut-off point for trying to say. But of course there are limitations on the number of speakers. So somebody could go, hoping to speak in front of the count anyway. If anybody is desperate to do it, maybe that, as Ian has obviously sort of taken this all on board, he's the best person to ask about it. But if we are going to have a council representative, obviously either Lisa or Emma will have to notify the powers that be of who he or she is. But we don't have to decide that tonight, unless somebody is absolutely at this point desperate to go and do it. That takes us to any other relevant matters for report only. As some people will be aware, we looked at the planning application in respect of the Stokely Road site, and we have made comments about it. You may recall that the developers sought a meeting with the council, which in fact Councillor Davis and myself attended virtually, together with the clerk. We reported on, I think, only at the last full council meeting. I gathered from Paul, maybe yesterday, it seems like forever ago, but probably it was only yesterday, that the tweaked application that we knew was coming has in fact already come. It came too late for us to get it on the agenda for this meeting. I think probably we're going to end up having to have a special meeting to look at it. I haven't looked at it again myself. Paul tells me it's 37 new documents. 39 new documents, well, I suppose. That's new ones, not the ones that were already there, which were quite extensive. So there's a lot of material there again. And I think the question is trying to sort out, if we're going to have an extra meeting, when we can have it. It will have to be over next week. I would imagine that we'll probably do what we did before, which is invite all councillors to attend, although I think from memory, Councillor Holland and Councillor Michael, I think, came previously. They might be interested in coming again, and maybe others would. February the 8th is a Finance and General Purposes meeting next Tuesday, so that's not open to us. So if we're going to have a meeting, we'll have to go another day next week. Now, I am in a position, I think, to probably go to a meeting on any other day that week. In fact, the one day I probably can't go to a meeting is the 8th, so probably not going to be at the 8th. Does anybody have a preference for a date? Because actually, if we're going to do it, we'll obviously have to get agendas out and give notice and everything else.
So who will be at the meeting? Who will be?
Well, this will be a meeting, it's this committee, but possibly plus other councillors,
Right,
in order to look at this one application.
here.
Again, here, in this room.
So why can't it wait for a month?
There isn't time. We can't do it at the next planning meeting because it's too, the timings don't work. And we don't seem to be very keen on giving us an extension.
No.
And the next full council meeting is, I gather, pretty full.
Right.
And I think it was Emma said
Won't have
that
time
she
to
didn't
discuss
think we'd
it.
have time
Yeah.
to discuss it sufficiently, or may not have time to discuss it sufficiently, or in the way we want to do it. Therefore, it looked like we had to have an extra meeting. So sadly, I think we're going to have to see if we can get one. That's obviously going to work if we can be quorate. As I say, I think
They will be 10, so 7 till 10.
Are you talking daytime then? Or
no, just another 7:30 meeting.
We can only do one day at 7.
Well, you can do the 7th, you can do the 7th, I can do the 7th, how can we do the
I
7th?
can do the 7th.
Yeah.
That's the Monday.
Can you do the 7th as well? Are you able to do the 7th? Oh, excellent. Right, well, in that case, there'll be a extraordinary meeting, 7:30 here. Hopefully one item on the agenda in terms of, I don't intend to look at any other planning applications, even if they're, as it were, about literally just to give us time to look at that. Would be worth refreshing your memory about the previous one, and then go on the portal please, if at all possible, and look at the new material, and we'll come and have a chat about it. Hopefully, it may not take too long. I mean, I'd like to think we can be done within the hour.
1, 2, 3. So the agenda will be coming out tomorrow
Right,
for the 3 clear days.
and can you not only circulate all of us, but can you let all councillors
Yeah.
have a copy and say that they're all invited if they wish to attend, whether or not they attended as it were originally. Right, any other matters? Joseph?
No.
I have nothing else. At least I don't think I have. Lucy doesn't think I have. Right, in that case, didn't quite manage to do it before 9:30, but it's only about a minute afterwards. But we did have, 40 minutes with Brian, and I think that was well worth the price of having an overrun this evening. And I just wish somebody else in the planning department would have been willing to have come and done a similar exercise. But anyway.